Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Arfat and welcome to a brand new video. Firstly, I apologize if you're hearing a lot of background noises. I'm actually blasting the fan because it is actually quite warm here. And today I would like to read to you an excerpt from an introduction to the New Testament for Catholics. A lot of the introductory textbook that we found regarding the New Testament, they're mostly written by Protestant scholars, and they're written from a Protestant point of view. And so today I'd like to switch it up and give you materials from a Catholic point of view. Okay, this is an introduction to the New Testament for Catholics. And so, what do Catholics need to know? What are being taught to the Catholics? Okay, so it is something interesting for me to put on the table, and inshallah in the future I can also give you make videos about introduction to the New Testament for Eastern Orthodox. Okay. Now, a lot of Protestants, when they read or when they attend seminaries or when they actually buy off-the-shelf books regarding the New Testament introduction, it is mostly written from a liberal perspective. That has been the accusation, and some Catholics refuse to actually study these books, with the exception of Raymond Brown, because Raymond Brown was a Catholic priest. And so, apart from his work, a lot of Catholics do not actually want to read materials written by Protestant, because of they have been accused as being liberals and things like that, even though it has nothing to do with that. And so, with that in mind, I thought I present you materials from a Catholic point of view. Okay. Or at least what the Catholics need to know, something that is actually written for the Catholics. Yeah. Now, as far as my research goes, Joseph Kelly is a Catholic, or is or was a Catholic. I'm not too sure, but something that is written by Catholic for Catholics, unlike Raymond Brown, written by Catholic for mostly Protestant audience. But this is something for Catholics. Do Catholics have a more conservative belief? Now, this question is very controversial, because it doesn't mean you are Catholic you are more conservative. It doesn't mean you are an Eastern Orthodox you are more conservative. Okay. But oftenly the Protestant camp has been accused of not being actually conservative, because they came out from the Reformation, right? About 600 years ago. Protestantism was born 600 years ago. Okay. And so the accusation that the Catholic has, even though the whole idea as to why there was a Reformation was to actually go back to the scripture, and in this case, in general, the Protestant accuse the Catholic of actually not following the scripture. Yeah, they are not actually following the scripture literally, nomina sacra. But on the other hand, the Catholic uses a chronological argument to accuse the Protestant that they have no tradition. Okay, their tradition derives 1500 years after Jesus. Okay. And so the Eastern Orthodox, on the other hand, also accuses the Catholic that they have been excommunicated. And a lot of the prominent church fathers, like Basil, the one that is prominent for the Trinitarian dogma, okay, they were not Western. They do not come from the Western camp. They came from the Eastern camp. Okay, for the first 300-400 years, majority of the players have been the Eastern camp. And so this is the accusation, okay, or the argument that the Eastern Orthodox put forward against the Catholic. And so you can see that there's a lot of quote-unquote wars here going on. Okay, and so majority of my material so far have been from the mainstream text, and that is from the Protestant text. Okay, not Protestant text, Protestant point of view, because that is what's being taught in like Yale, Oxford. Okay, from a Protestant perspective. but it is also nice to hear from a Catholic perspective, inshallah. So returning back to our question, are Catholics more conservative than Protestant? My argument is definitely no, because if you understand the Protestant argument, okay, and I think the Protestant argument makes more sense, because they are returning back to the scripture and they avoid traditions, okay, and they do not involve themselves with, like, they have nothing to do with idols, okay, and iconoclasts, okay, because the Protestant argument is that these are actually forbidden in the Torah, okay. But the Catholics accuses the Protestant, as I've indicated earlier on, that they do not have any tradition. Okay, and so do you want to have tradition with you, or do you want to actually return back to the scripture? Okay, what are my personal views then when it comes to Catholicism, Protestantism, and Orthodoxy? As far as my research goes, I think the Protestant camp, even though they came 1500 years later, they're much more closer to what the Bible as a whole, okay, actually teaches. Okay. But nevertheless, it is not within my purview per se, or also my interest to actually get deeper into this question. But let's go here. Okay, this is page 86. Okay. Understanding the gospel. Even though we know the gospels may not be biographies, they still present problems, again because of misunderstanding. The gospels of Matthew and John give us particularly valuable testimony because 2 of the 12 apostles wrote them, right? Okay, the author is asking, right? Unfortunately, no. Okay, we will discuss each gospel separately. Okay, let me move on here. The evangelists did not put their names on their work. Okay. In the 2nd century, Christians named the evangelists, meaning Christian actually put the title of the book, like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It is given by Christians in the 2nd century, as early as Irenaeus in around 170 to 180 of the Common Era. But the names do not derive from the Gospels themselves. Okay, that does not necessarily mean that the names are wrong. Okay? If you look at Eusebius, he mentions that these are the works written by this and this, and he quotes Irenaeus. Okay. Matthew cannot have been written by one of the 12 because Matthew copies material from Mark. Now, if you do not understand, or if you have not been following scholarship, the reason why this is actually not the reason why that this is actually a strong argument is because that Matthew is a disciple of Jesus, if you read the gospel, but Mark is not within the 12. Okay, Mark is not even the disciple of Jesus, and so why would a disciple of Jesus, Matthew, copies material from a non-disciple of Jesus? Right? It doesn't make sense here, because Matthew had access to Jesus, whereas Mark is like, he's a nobody. So why would a disciple of Jesus copy from a nobody? Yeah. To ask the obvious question, why would an eyewitness to Jesus' life copy material from someone who was not there? Okay, this is what the author is questioning us. There is also the problem of Matthew's Greek. Clearly, the evangelist was a native Greek speaker, not a Galilean who learned Greek as a second language. Okay, and so Matthew was a tax collector, and he is definitely not a Greek. If you follow scholarship, he is likely to be a Jew, or he could be a Gentile that has embraced Judaism. And he's a even though he's a tax collector, but tax collector in the past is different from a tax collector today. Tax collector in the past is basically like you're being sent to just collect money. Okay, that's it. Okay, whereas a tax collector today, or I mean, there's no such thing as tax collector today for the most part of the world, because people actually do pay their taxes themselves, and they go to the branch to pay them. But the administrator, it needs to be knowledgeable, needs to have education. But in the past, they do not need to have such education. Okay, because if Matthew was an educated person, he wouldn't be a tax collector from Galilee. Yeah, I mean, Galilee is like nowhere. It's in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, no tourists pass through Galilee. It's just like a fishing village. Yeah, if you study the Atlas. As for John, the Gospel of John never mentions an apostle named John, speaking only of the beloved disciple, whom 2nd century Christians identified as John. And if the beloved disciple were John, he still could not have written the Gospel, since the Gospel itself says that it derives from the testimony of the beloved disciple, who apparently had already died, in John 21:23. So how can someone that has died written a Gospel? As with Matthew, John's Greek is a problem, since this Galilean fisherman wrote very sophisticated Greek. We simply do not have eyewitness accounts from any of the 12, but we still follow standard practice and use the traditional names. Meaning these are just pen names, okay, for the sake of convenience. They should not be attributed to any historical figure. Since we do not have eyewitness accounts, we can see again the importance of oral tradition and of the church as the preserver of that tradition. Mention of the church brings up another important point. The evangelists wrote for particular communities, and the Gospels often tell us about those communities. Okay. Now, and so with that, you can see here that even Catholic scholars writing materials for Catholics, they're actually trying to. This is actually a recent phenomena, okay? Because I mean, we're going on a tangent here. But throughout, before the 20th century, okay, before the First Vatican Council, before the Second Vatican Council, if to correct myself, before the 20th century, meaning before the 19th century, historical criticism was not embraced by the Catholic Church. Yeah. It is not until recently, about the past 50, 60 years, also 70 years, whereby historical criticism has been Catholic scholars are able to embrace historical criticism. Yeah, so this is a recent phenomena. Whereas if you look at the Protestant camp, they have been embracing historical criticism. Even though historical criticism do undergo development, if you have been following the literature over the past 300 years, but ever since the time of Walter Bauer and so on and so forth, historical criticism has been embraced, and in fact, even churches nowadays are actually starting to teach their congregation about what scholars actually say. Now, obviously, the most fundamentalist, the most conservative church would not embrace this. Same for the Catholic Church. We do have a lot of Catholic Church here in my country, and as far as I know, they have not been embracing this that much, because when you speak to Catholics, you can see, whether they have been taught this or not, and so. But it is great that literatures like this are being written to actually address the Catholic audience, to actually present them what scholars have been saying. Now, a lot of the materials, if you look at the citations, if you look at the whole idea, the whole concept, or the whole thesis, if you were to say, for this book, it comes from the majority of the material comes from the Protestant camp. because Protestant scholars wrote all these materials, and the author here is just gathering materials and writing them into a book. This could also be a problem for conservative Catholics, yeah. Because whilst this book might be written by a Catholic and for a Catholic audience, but the citations, okay, or the materials that was used, or the whole idea of historical criticism actually came from more towards the Protestant camp. And so this could be the argument that conservative Catholics will actually use against. Okay, basically, they do not just want to embrace what scholars say; they want to actually, turn down the volume of what scholars have been saying, and they do not accept like scholars from liberal arts institution. Okay. But nevertheless, more materials should be written for Catholics, because the Protestant camp has dominated a lot of the literatures out there, especially when it comes to introductory textbook for the New Testament. And we see a lot of Christians writing introduction to the whole Old Testament as well, from a Protestant perspective, mostly referring to the Protestant Bible. Okay. King James, NRSV, RSV, ESV. Okay, and so we need more materials written for Catholics from a Catholic perspective. The only ones that I've read that I actually know, apart from this, is Raymond Brown, written by a Catholic father, a former Catholic priest, for like general audience. Yeah. And so it is quite sad actually. We need more materials, and I wish, if you know any more materials, please recommend me in the comment section below. But anyway, an introduction to the New Testament for Catholics by Joseph Kelly. Joseph Kelly has written another book. He has written a lot of books, but the other one I owned from him is about the Ecumenical Council. That is something that is great also if you want to study about the development of this different council, and especially the first 300, 400, 500 years or so. But nevertheless, ladies and gentlemen, without making this video too long, I sign off. My name is Arfat. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.